Welcome back. At the top of the program, we showed you how we got to this point when it comes to impeachment, and also we spoke to a constitutional scholar about the impeachment case. Now, for the next couple blocks, we're going to be speaking with former lawmakers who spent decades in Washington. In a minute, former Senator Bob Kerrey, Democrat from Nebraska. But joining me now is former Democratic Congressman from New York, Steve Israel. The congressman, he was also chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. When you see what's about to happen, do you miss Congress, or you say, thank you very much, but I'm happy to be back in New York?
You know, I'll tell you what, I miss my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I speak with them almost every day. I do not miss the circus. I do not miss the screaming and the shouting. I do not miss the attacks. And I certainly do not miss the fundraising. But I have to admit, I do have an affection for those that I left behind.
To that end, and you mentioned the circus, it's interesting who's been appointed to these committees, and it's also interesting some of the evolving defenses that have already been laid out for what the president did or didn't do, and the moving rationales. To that end, do you think we should expect a circus tomorrow? Or do you think that we're going to look back on this like we did in Watergate, where there was an actual pursuit for the truth?
Well, I hope that this will be about a pursuit for the truth. You know, I've studied what happened in Watergate, and in that case, you did have bipartisan responsibility. Members of Congress took their oaths to the Constitution seriously. They knew that they had to go back and win elections, but that seemed to be put aside for the gravity of the moment. This atmosphere seems to me to be quite different, and quite different for two reasons. Number one, gerrymandering has pulled Congress to the far left and the far right. And so I've spoken to many of my colleagues who are Republican, and they tell me that they may want to vote to impeach President Trump, but they can't, because if they do, they're going to go back to their districts and lose in a Republican primary. And so that's a fundamental difference. The weaponization of gerrymandering has just locked in positions. And the second thing is that, to be honest, I believe that if Richard Nixon had Fox News, he wouldn't have been impeached. You know, Fox has become such a megaphone, and a lot of members of Congress not only fear a presidential tweet, but they fear getting vilified by Fox, and I don't think that's particularly healthy for our democracy.
And I want to get to some of the Republican principles that people, if they're not familiar already, will be by the end of these hearings. But let's talk about who the audience is tomorrow. You know Adam Schiff. Is he, and I'll give you a multiple choice here, is he saying, listen, the only thing I care about isn't the people necessarily in this room, it's the people at home. We've seen the polling, but now they're going to hear from Ambassador Taylor. They're going to be hearing from some of these principles that, have we been told the least, and we've seen from the transcripts, are sober, career-minded people that don't seem to have a political agenda. Or is he trying to hold the Democrats so it's not like 218 votes when it comes there? He's got almost the entire party and maybe even some retiring Republicans. Or is he saying, this is going to get through the House, I got to focus on a case that those 20 Republican senators at the end of the day will say, you know what, this is not just he said, she said, there's substance and there's a high crime and a misdemeanor. Who at the end are the Democrats trying to most communicate with?
It's a great question, Richard, and the answer is three audiences in particular. The members of the House of Representatives who may or may not end up voting on an impeachment that goes to the Senate. B, members of the Senate who may or may not vote to acquit or convict the president should that trial be held. And C, to the public. Now, this is what's important. When I talk about the public, we're not necessarily talking about the overall public. This is a locked-in electorate. 35% of the electorate loves President Trump. No matter what comes out in a trial or a hearing, they will not love him any less. 45% of the electorate loathes Donald Trump. No matter what vindication may come out in a trial or a hearing, they're not going to loathe him any less. That leaves 20%. 20% of the electorate is still undecided about President Trump. And so the key audience in terms of public persuasion and making the case is to that 20% that's still undecided.
You know, it's sad, but that's really it, isn't it? There's going to be a couple faces that are familiar to you and I, maybe some of our viewing audience, but we're going to get to know Devin Nunes and we're going to get to know Jim Jordan, two Republican congressmen. And if you listen to Jim Jordan, the only thing we should be focusing on is Hunter and Joe Biden here. And if you listen to Devin Nunes, you're listening to a guy who literally, almost at a full sprint, went from behind closed-door hearings to give the minutes of the meeting here to the White House, then was told what to say and went out on the front lawn of the White House and gave the White House's talking points. To that 20% that you just identified, if it turns into a food fight, and if they go off topic, if you will, not to the witnesses they were in front of us, but if they demean their military service to this country, their service to this country, or they're trying to make this all about the Bidens, do they risk more than they potentially gain in that it'll become, or at least the perception of a complete unseriousness?
Here is the political problem that the Republicans have. They've got a pro-Trump base that they cannot afford to demoralize in the upcoming election. But they've also got independent Republicans, moderate Republicans, who don't like the idea of a president who vilifies his own military, who don't like the idea of Republicans on the Intelligence Committee of running off, as you said, to the White House in the dead of night to take a look at documents. That 20%, they tend to be swing voters, and the more, in my view, the more the Republicans double down in exciting the pro-Trump base with circus-like antics, the worse they will do with those independents and moderates. And look, you can see it in the data. You know, when the House became engaged in the impeachment inquiry, the public was not really with them. But the more they learn, the more they know, the more they support this inquiry. So that the latest data says that a plurality of Americans not only support impeachment, but also support removal. Now, I would suggest that we all just wait to see what the evidence is and make a judgment then. There may not even be an impeachment once the committees conclude their investigations. But public sentiment right now is following Democrats on impeachment, and that 20% tends to reflect public sentiment.
As you mentioned, Congressman, you've spoken to a lot of your colleagues on both sides of the aisle. If Adam Schiff, and maybe he already did, said, all right, Steve, give me the do's and don'ts here. Where do I go? I don't think he's going to ad-lib anymore a narrative as to what he took away from maybe the conversation of Trump. He's going to basically be literal as can be. I get that. But more than that, does he punch back if he thinks folks on the other side are taking this meeting into Neverland? How does he handle what will be expected to be fireworks, if not from those testifying, those doing the questioning?
Well, it's a great question, and we know already that the Republicans will try several strategies. Number one, they're going to try and bait him. They're going to try and goad him. They're going to try and get under his skin so that he reacts and hope that his reaction turns people off. He's not going to fall into that trap. He's a former federal prosecutor who knows how to argue a case to a jury. So that tactic has already failed, as it did when they stormed the committee demanding to be heard, despite the fact that most of them were entitled to be in the room. The second thing they're going to try and do is just obfuscate this thing, is just kind of make it a circus and try and turn people off, turn the whole public off to this. So they're going to kind of light a fire and then hope everybody's sick of the flames. And look, we should be prepared for that. Schiff has, and he is my best friend in Congress. I talk to him every single day. Adam Schiff brings to this task the perfect blend of a former federal prosecutor who knows how to try a case and get to the facts, and B, somebody who has been on the Intelligence Committee, who understands the complexities, the difficulties, and the issues with respect to foreign intelligence and national security. He's going to bring those skills to the table and expect that the Republicans are going to do everything they can to disrupt, to distract, and to deflect. That will be their playbook, and he's prepared for it.
Well, I know you missed some of your colleagues, but D.C. is becoming as toxic as I can remember it here, and I know you're enjoying your life outside of the nation's capital. But, Congressman, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've learned how to smile again. Thank you.
And coming up next, a war hero and former U.S. Senator joins us with his take on impeachment, the Ukraine scandal that started all, and much more. Bob Kerrey, he's with us after the break.